For years, you've heard the same story about Madeleine McCann, but there is something that has been hidden all along, a secret that could change everything. What don't the McCanns want you to know? For years, you've heard the same stories from a resort in Portugal while her parents are dining with friends. The media portrays Kate and Jerry McCann as victims of a cruel and inexplicable crime. The Portuguese police launch an investigation that quickly becomes one of the most controversial cases in modern history. But what if I told you that the version we know might be wrong? From day one, something about this case didn't seem right. Conflicting accounts, ignored evidence, dismissed witnesses, and media coverage that appeared to be carefully crafted. Now imagine that there is a crucial detail that was overlooked, an element that could completely change the way we understand this story. If this information had been taken seriously at the time, could the case have been solved? Or worse, could someone have worked to ensure that certain truths were never revealed? What don't the McCanns want you to know? In the next few minutes, we will analyze every forgotten clue, every contradiction in the investigation, and every detail that was buried. Because if this happened in this case, how many other mysteries might have been distorted by the media? Prepare yourself, because what we are about to reveal could make you question everything you thought you knew about Madeleine McCann's disappearance. Here is something no one expected. Within the first few hours after Madeleine disappeared, an unusual move took place behind the scenes. The police were still trying to understand what had happened. No investigative lead was ruled out, but suddenly the British government stepped in, and we're not talking about normal involvement. British diplomats quickly arrived in Portugal. Prime Minister Gordon Brown got personally involved in the case. Now think about it. How many children disappear every day? How many of those families receive immediate attention from their country's government? If Madeleine were just another tragic case, why would such powerful figures be interested in it? And here is another uncomfortable detail. Why did the McCanns receive preferential media treatment? From the start, British newspapers protected the couple's image. Meanwhile, any attempt to investigate inconsistencies in their version was dismissed as an absurd theory or a cruel attack on grieving parents. Now imagine if it were different. If the McCanns didn't have influential contacts, would the police have handled the case in the same way? If the McCanns were protected from the very beginning, then the question we must ask is, protected by whom and why? The problem is much bigger than a simple disappearance. From day one, the details of the case never completely added up. Let's start with the supposed break-in at Madeleine's room. The McCanns' initial account stated that the apartment window had been forced open, but Portuguese experts quickly debunked that version. There were no signs of forced entry, no strange fingerprints, no trace of someone breaking in. If there was no invasion, how did Madeleine disappear? Now let's talk about something even stranger, the sniffer dogs. The police used specialized dogs trained to detect scents of blood in a body, and these dogs indicated suspicious signs inside the McCanns' apartment. More specifically, near the sofa and in the closet. And there's more. The same scent was detected in the trunk of the car rented by the McCanns weeks later. Forensic science shows that these dogs have an accuracy rate of up to 86% in criminal cases. So why was this evidence dismissed so quickly? And here comes the final detail. Jerry McCann's phone. On the night of the disappearance, he made a mysterious call that vanished from the official records. Who was he trying to contact? And why was this call never thoroughly investigated? It seems that every time a new clue emerges, it is quickly dismissed, minimized, or simply ignored. The question remains, who has the power to manipulate an investigation at this level? Now imagine this scene. A child disappears in the middle of the night. The police arrive, ask questions, and begin the search. But instead of following normal protocol, the investigators are pressured to follow a single line. Evidence that doesn't fit is discarded. Witnesses who ask uncomfortable questions are ignored. And when the case reaches the media, there is a ready-made narrative to be told. No matter what the investigation uncovers, the story has already been decided. And if that's exactly what happened in the McCann case, if everything was carefully molded to make us believe in only one version, if the evidence was ignored, if powerful figures influenced the investigation, then what else was hidden? Because if all of this is true, then the McCanns may not just be parents seeking justice, but central pieces in a secret that we investigate what the media prefers not to show, analyzing every forgotten detail and every silenced piece of evidence. If you want to continue unraveling mysteries like this, subscribe now. In the next few minutes, you will learn about the most shocking inconsistencies in this case, and what comes next might change everything. That night, everything seemed to follow a pattern. Kate and Jerry McCann were dining with friends at the resort's restaurant. just a few meters from the apartment where Madeline was sleeping with her twin siblings. From time to time, one of the adults would get up to check on the children. But here is something that never made sense. The times never added up. Jerry McCann said he went to the apartment around 9:05 p.m. He saw Madeline sleeping peacefully, but he did not mention whether he checked on the twins. 5 minutes later, he returned to the table. At 9:30 p.m., it was Kate McCann's turn, but this time Madeline was no longer there. Now here's the first contradiction. The couple claimed they left the door unlocked to facilitate checking on the children, but initially they said that someone had broken in through the window and taken Madeline. The problem? The police found no signs of a break-in, no force marks, no strange fingerprints. Nothing indicated that someone had entered through the window. So if there was no invasion, how did Madeline disappear? And there's more. Soon after realizing their daughter was missing, Jerry McCann made a mysterious phone call. To this day, we do not know whom he called. The record of that call disappeared from the official timeline of the investigation. The question is, what did he know at that moment that required such an urgent call? Now, if all this already sounds strange, wait until you see what the sniffer dogs discovered. When the Portuguese police brought in trained sniffer dogs to detect the odor of a corpse and traces of blood, no one expected what was about to come. The dogs identified the scent of blood and decomposition behind the living room sofa in the McCann's apartment. But what happened next is even stranger. The family had already left Portugal months before the police decided to test the car they had rented weeks after the disappearance. The dogs were taken to the trunk of the Renault Scenic rented by the McCanns. And again, they reacted. Experts collected samples for analysis, and the tests revealed something disturbing. There were traces of DNA compatible with Madeline. Now think about it. How could a car rented weeks after the disappearance contain traces of Madeline? The family's reaction was immediate. The McCanns claimed that the odor and traces could have resulted from the twins' discarded diapers. But specialists disputed this explanation. The smell of human decomposition is different from any other. So if the dogs were right, what does that mean? If this evidence had been taken seriously, could the case have been solved by now? And if you think that is enough to raise suspicions, wait until you discover the connection between the McCanns and another famous case that followed a very similar pattern. The Portuguese police had in their hands something that could change everything. The sniffer dogs had identified the odor of a corpse and traces of blood in the McCanns' apartment and in the car they rented. Investigators believed they were facing crucial evidence. But then something unexpected happened. Before they could pursue this line of investigation further, pressure started coming from above. Suddenly, British diplomats became involved in the case. The United Kingdom government sent representatives to monitor the investigation. And gradually, the course of the story began to change. The British media, which should have questioned the facts and exposed the inconsistencies, seemed more concerned with protecting the McCanns. While the Portuguese police were raising hypotheses about a possible involvement of the couple, British newspapers focused on portraying Kate and Jerry as unjustly victimized. The public was led to believe that any doubt about the McCanns was an absurd theory. And the question remains, why would a couple of doctors receive such protection? Here's a detail that few people know. Shortly after Madeline's disappearance, the McCanns hired a professional public relations firm. Now think about it. How many families who lose a missing child hire a spokesperson before the police have reached any conclusion? The media coverage was controlled from the very beginning, and any narrative suggesting something beyond a kidnapping was discredited. But if the McCanns were being protected, who had an interest in ensuring that their version was the only one accepted? And more importantly, what does this mean for Madeline's disappearance? Other children were disappearing every day, and no one was talking about them. This leads us to an even worldwide attention while others are ignored. Here's a fact that few people mention. During the first months of the McCann case, other children also disappeared in Portugal and across Europe. But do you remember the name of any of them? The difference? None of them were the child of a white, upper-class British couple. Studies show that coverage of disappearances follows a troubling pattern. Black children, or those from poor families or less influential countries, almost never received the same level of attention. And this wasn't limited to the McCann case. Remember the JonBenet Ramsey case? Another story of a missing child where the parents were surrounded by power and influence. The media shaped the narrative in such a way that, to this day, the public doesn't know what to believe. Now back to the main point. If the media controlled the McCann's narrative, if the Portuguese police were pressured by the British government, then who was in control of this story all along? And what if Madeline wasn't just a victim of a mysterious disappearance, but of something much bigger, something they never wanted us to uncover? Now that we've reached the most delicate point of this case, the most uncomfortable questions need to be asked. If all the evidence we've examined so far was on the police's table, why was the case never solved? The answer may lie in the alternative versions that were discarded from the beginning. One of the most debated theories among independent investigators, and even among some members of the Portuguese police, is that Madeleine was never kidnapped. According to this hypothesis, the girl might have died in the apartment that night, and her parents, for some reason, decided to cover it up. The sniffer dogs found the odor of a corpse near the sofa. The DNA found in the trunk of the rented car raises even more suspicions. Now imagine this scene. A child suffers a fatal accident in a controlled environment. The parents panic. They know that any mistake could destroy their lives. And if, in their desperation, they made a decision from which they could never go back, the question is, if this theory is true, where is Madeleine's body? And more importantly, how did they manage to keep this story intact for so many years? David Payne, a name that came up more than once during the investigations, but was always set aside. As we've seen, he was the last friend in the group to see Madeleine alive, and his name was also mentioned in some uncomfortable testimonies. Dr. Caterina Gaspar, a friend of the McCanns, reported that Payne made inappropriate comments about children during a trip before Madeleine's disappearance. But for some reason, the police never investigated him thoroughly. If there is something strange in this story, Payne might be a key piece that was simply never placed on the board. And here comes an even more serious doubt. What if Madeleine wasn't dead? What if she was taken for something much bigger than a simple domestic crime? Amid so many theories about what happened to Madeleine McCann, there is one that has always been considered too controversial to discuss in mainstream media. What if Madeleine wasn't the victim of an accident or a family crime? What if she was taken by an international child trafficking network? Now, before dismissing this idea, consider this. In the years following Madeleine's disappearance, witnesses reported seeing children who looked like her in different countries: Spain, Morocco, and even in the United States. None of these leads were taken seriously by British authorities. Why? If Madeleine was indeed kidnapped for a larger scheme, that would explain why certain pieces of evidence were ignored. And there's more. Portugal is one of the European countries with the highest history of human trafficking. There are reports of children disappearing under circumstances very similar to Madeleine's. But here's the problem. None of these children received the same attention as Madeleine McCann. Why? One of the biggest barriers to solving the case has always been the confusion surrounding the scientific evidence. First, we had the sniffer dogs, which indicated signs of blood and the odor of decomposition in the apartment. Then, we had the DNA found in the car rented by the McCanns. But suddenly, the analyses began to be questioned. The Portuguese police trusted these data, but British experts argued that the biological material was inconclusive. Now think about it. How many cases have been solved based on far less evidence than this? If science is used conveniently, it can not only reveal the truth, but also hide it. At this point, it's clear that there are many layers to this mystery. Perhaps Madeleine was the victim of an accident that was covered up. Perhaps she was taken by someone who knew her and knew exactly how to evade. Perhaps she was captured for something much bigger, something that should never have been uncovered. And here's the most unsettling part. If this story was manipulated from the start, will we ever have all the answers one day? The case of Madeleine McCann remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in modern history, and what we know today may be just a fraction of the truth. But one thing does not change. Someone, somewhere knows exactly what happened that night. And what if this whole story is just what they wanted us to believe? The truth behind Madeleine McCann's disappearance, as we have shown, goes far beyond the official version. With every ignored detail, with every silenced clue, more questions arise than answers. And what if the story everyone accepted as true was merely a construction, a game of interest that made us see only what they wanted us to see? How many times do we accept a story without questioning the inconsistencies? And even more, how many times does the media, which should be informing us, end up manipulating public perception by omitting or distorting facts in the name of a convenient narrative? The McCann case teaches us a painful lesson about how the deepest layers of a story can be hidden, as if the truths were disposable, when what is at stake is much greater than a simple tragedy. We may never know the truth about Madeleine McCann, but one thing is certain: there is something they never wanted us to discover. What we are seeing is not just a mystery of disappearance, but a tangle of powerful influences, fact manipulation, and decisions that shaped the fate of this case from the very beginning. If everything we have shown so far wasn't enough to make you question the official version, what will it take to open your eyes? The answer may lie in a place that few dare to look. And in the next video, we will explore another key piece of this mystery. Who else might be involved, and how does that change everything you thought you knew until now? Don't miss it. If you've stayed with me this far and want to follow more of these investigations, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Every clue we uncover here will bring you closer to the truth that others prefer to hide. And tell me, what do you think? Does the official version make sense, or is there something much bigger behind it? If you watched until the end, comment "I am a questioner," so I know you stayed with me until the very end and are as committed as I am to uncovering the hidden truth. Let's continue this journey together.